Good afternoon, and thank you for joining us for today's briefing. I'm joined once again by interpreter Margie Prop, and thank you so much, Margie, for providing your services to our viewers. Our community has endured so much in the last few months, from the economic and health impacts of COVID-19 to the grief and anger that has welled up here and in cities across our country in the wake of the murder of George Floyd. The cries for justice that we hear now are not simply a response to one single senseless murder. These cries pour out from too many years and lifetimes of racism experienced by Black residents and communities of color. Today, we are announcing steps in our city that we are taking to address these calls for justice and to reaffirm the commitment of the City of Lincoln and the Lincoln Police Department in building, in partnership with our community, a more equitable and inclusive society. The policies, practices, and programs we discuss today are designed to foster trust and community and are designed to lead to more equitable outcomes for every resident in policing and beyond. These efforts, part of our vision to lead Lincoln toward a more successful, secure, and shared future, are both crucial and continuous. The steps we outlined today are part of a long-term, ongoing effort to address inequities in health, economic well-being, criminal justice, and many other facets of society, inequities that have plagued America for generations. That said, we want to be clear that the proposed changes we discussed today are based on local input gathered through hours of community conversations and listening sessions, as well as hundreds of emails and phone calls, and are informed by national standards and best practices. We are fortunate that our Lincoln Police Department already embraces and operates under many of the policies and practices that our residents are asking us to contemplate. We are also fortunate that LPD is open to implementing changes that enhance their ability to ensure greater safety for all residents, and changes that provide further reassurance to the public that LPD understands how essential it is to have a strong foundation of trust between law enforcement agencies and the people whom they protect and serve. Today, we will address a number of steps organized around the topic areas of policy, accountability, transparency, community partnerships, and broader cultural change. First, we will talk about updates to our police use of force policies, protocols for mass demonstrations, and the process for applying for a mayoral pardon. Next, we will address steps toward greater police accountability through our Citizen Police Advisory Board, participation in a community-led initiative, and community surveys. Then we will discuss increased transparency through the accelerated implementation of body-worn cameras and more accessible statistical data. We will reaffirm our commitment to a community policing approach that relies on relationships with residents and valued partners to produce public safety outcomes that do not rely entirely on a traditional police response. And finally, we will outline several initiatives that the city plans to undertake to address racial inequities in other aspects of the work that we do. By broadening our gaze beyond the work of our police department, we can make the most of this pivotal moment to meaningfully and collectively advance inclusion in our community. Before we begin, I would like to acknowledge once again that I approach this vital work with humility, recognizing that I do not have all the answers and that I am only part of the solutions, since we all have a part to play in creating a more just and inclusive community. I also want to acknowledge that our Chief of Police, Jeff Bleimeister, is here and will join me in making remarks during the briefing. The Chief's leadership, integrity, and compassion are invaluable as we undertake this important work. I am grateful to Chief Bleimeister and to our officers for the dedicated work they put into community policing every day. LPD's humility and desire to listen and to look for ways to be even better set the stage for Lincoln to emerge as a model for other communities to follow. So let's talk about how we get there. Our local engagement with residents as part of the larger national conversation about policing and racial justice has involved thousands of emails and calls from constituents requesting immediate, specific changes to our police use of force policies. This heightened involvement of our community members is a testament to the power of youth engagement in our democracy. In response, LPD has stepped up in the aftermath of tragedy in Minneapolis to do an expedited review alongside our office of their use of force policies. Today, we are pleased to announce proposed revisions to LPD's use of force policies, also known as General Order 1510, based on the extensive input received to date, a lens of law enforcement experience, and principles of violence reduction and de-escalation. It is vitally important to highlight the fact that much of what the public has asked of LPD regarding use of force policies existed before today as either a part of this general order or as an LPD best practice. In other words, these proposed revisions will make current policy more explicit and codify LPD's current best practices. The proposed revisions include an explicit ban on chokeholds and strangleholds, codification of the current training at LPD that officers provide a verbal warning before the use of lethal force when feasible, and the warning would not further endanger those involved. More comprehensive reporting of police use of force, including a requirement that pointing a firearm at a person outside of a training environment be considered a reportable event. A reaffirmation of the duty to intervene with the requirement that situations calling for intervention must be reported along with the efforts to intervene, and specification of de-escalation strategies that are a part of existing policies, practice, and the culture of LPD, and that involve evaluating the totality of the individual's circumstances before using force. These proposed revisions to General Order 1510 are also consistent with other model use of force policies across the country. The revisions can be found on the Lincoln Police Department's website under the Department Policies tab. In the interest of continued community engagement, members of the public may comment on these proposed revisions by emailing cpab@lincoln.ne.gov. The public comment period will be open until July 15th. After that, the Citizen Police Advisory Board will review and consider the proposed revisions at their July 22nd meeting, along with the additional public feedback, and will issue a report with recommended policy changes no later than August 21st. By September 30th, we anticipate changes to General Order 1510 will be finalized for purposes of this year, and that training for LPD staff will be well underway. Next, we turn to the review of recent incidents and LPD's protocols for mass demonstrations. LPD is currently reviewing and investigating the events of May 29th through June 1st and updating their training and protocols for facilitating peaceful protests based on these recent experiences of large-scale demonstrations and riots. Chief Blymeister will provide more explanation about this process. Chief?
Mayor, thank you. And to begin, I want to extend my appreciation on behalf of all members of our staff for each and every citizen that has taken the time to share their perspectives on our policies, our training, our existing community partnerships, our mission, and most importantly, the ways that we serve with Lincoln. We are reading and we are listening and working towards an in-depth understanding, and that is very important to each member of our agency. Our staff will continue to serve with empathy and professionalism, problem solving with you in the most complex situations that society has to offer. There are incredible men and women that work at LPD, and we welcome the opportunity to improve. As the mayor mentioned, there is a review of the events that began on May 29th through June 1st underway. And this is a multifaceted approach to this particular topic. What we have done so far is that each and every incident where there was some type of control that was used during those days, there was in-depth reports that were completed. Each of those reports, as part of our standard process, has quality assurance measures built in, allowing for the review at different levels of our chain of command. In addition, in this particular instance, members of a command staff our use of control instructors, our management services captain, and myself sat through and looked at each and every report. A second tier to this is comparing and contrasting the investigative reports that exist in partnership with these use of control reports. And we are continuing to migrate through that particular process because, as you are aware, these investigative reports are also documenting hit-and-run accidents, arsons, countless dollars in property destruction, assaults, and the assaults of 23 police officers. A third component to this is looking at all of the existing video that we have obtained, that citizens have provided us, that exists in so many different facets. And that video review is extensive, so we're comparing and contrasting that to the use of control reports and to the investigative reports. And so those particular processes are ongoing. In addition, the leadership from our field force has completed an initial debrief and will be providing recommendations back to me. We will be prepared to present a timeline of this information both to our staff, to the mayor, to the city council, and to the public once this review is completed. We know that it is of utmost importance to incorporate in what we have learned, what we did right, and what we can do better, and then to codify those existing practices into existing general orders that talk about these different rarely used operations and to strengthen them in the future. Additionally, it will be incorporated into the training curriculums at the Lincoln Police Department. We want to share the experiences with those that come after us and to all of our staff who were not involved so we can have an in-depth understanding. These are some extraordinary events, and I want to share my commitment and the commitment on part of the Lincoln Police Department that it will make an impact and it will make us a stronger organization. And with that, I'll turn it back over to the mayor.
Thank you, Chief. Next, I would like to address the topic of pardons. According to the city charter, the mayor has authority to grant pardon requests for anyone convicted of violating a city code. That means that anyone has the right to request a pardon based on any convicted violation of city code. Pardons serve an important, limited role in our society. They are a sign of clemency, intended to be reserved for special, exceptional cases, lest they become a tool of abuse, disorder, or inequity. Of course, people are free to protest laws that they've deemed to be unfair or unjust, and there's a history of civil disobedience in our country and elsewhere. One form of civil disobedience involves voluntarily and peacefully submitting to arrest with the intent and purpose that the arrest remain on record. We do not presume that all those who were charged with a curfew violation would even seek a pardon. Consistent with the long-standing norms and process, pardon determinations are made on an individualized case-by-case basis. In an effort to make this process more transparent, accessible, and equitable, we have revised the city's pardon application with equity in mind and posted it on our website. You can find the application by going to lincoln.ne.gov and typing in the keyword pardon. After 6 months from today have passed, we will review pardon applications based on curfew violations. While we generally cannot predetermine whether a person merits a pardon or not without taking a full look at their application, I will say this: I will not grant pardons to anyone who engaged in acts of violence, destruction, or physical aggression in connection with the nights in question. Next, we wish to discuss the importance of accountability and transparency. Accountability is essential to ensure that our policies are being followed appropriately and that every resident is treated fairly and without bias. One mechanism that currently exists to provide accountability and oversight for LPD is our Citizen Police Advisory Board, or CPAB. The CPAB is responsible for hearing complaints related to police behavior and policing policies. The 7-member board, comprised of residents appointed by the mayor, was created by an ordinance in 1975 and was last updated in 2011. Our administration has prepared a draft of revisions to the ordinance governing this board and will go before the City Council in July with the following proposed changes. First, we will propose that residents could submit complaint forms electronically. The current process is outdated and requires that a person submit a complaint form in person at the mayor's office. This change will allow for electronic filing of complaints and will improve accessibility. Second, we will expand the amount of time that a resident has to submit a complaint about a specific incident from 45 days to 60 days. Extending this time period more closely reflects the time frame for filing complaints in many other cities. And third, we will also expand the membership of the CPAB to allow for 2 additional members. And this expansion will allow for an even more diverse cross-section of community members to serve on the board and will allow the board to more easily meet their quorum requirements. Subject to approval by the City Council, these updates will strengthen the accountability of opportunities that are afforded by our Citizen Police Advisory Board. Beyond the accountability provided by the CPAB, our police are participating in a new bi-monthly initiative led by the Malone Center, which the community-based organizers call Hold Cops Accountable. This effort is designed to give Lincoln residents an opportunity to publicly voice their feedback on police-community relations. Chief Blymeister and several officers took part in the first HCA Community Forum last Thursday, and the chief will share more information about LPD's participation in this community-led initiative.
As the mayor mentioned, the first meeting of the HCA was held on June 25th, and I want to extend my gratitude and appreciation to the leadership at the Malone Center and to their board of directors who did quite a bit in advance to prepare for this and worked very diligently to ensure a constructive conversation, and that is what I experienced when I went there. I participated, so I had an opportunity to sit back to listen, and I took those listening points and I brought it back to our staff, and I've shared that with our staff. And I look forward to these continuing meetings so we can listen to understand, so there can be part of our staff that has the opportunity to explain the whys behind some of the actions. Some of those whys are difficult to understand without having that in-depth explanation. And so there will be increased oversight, increased accountability, hard questions asked, and that's something that we welcome and look forward to. Mayor? Yeah. Additional ways, how do we receive feedback? And that is an important component of what we do. LPD utilizes a survey that was constructed in partnership with the Gallup organization back in 1993. They're called quality service audits. And we have been conducting those quality service audits with randomized sampling of individuals who were the victims of nonviolent crimes, involved in traffic collisions, or issued a citation. These audits are compiled on a monthly basis. That information is provided back to me and to members of our organization, and we're looking through that to see where we're meeting and where we're not meeting the expectations of those that have been polled. I believe that it is a cornerstone of the Lincoln Police Department to use this particular data to measure how we're doing in the community. And we've set those benchmarks, and those benchmarks have been met last year and the years before that. How safe and secure do you feel in your neighborhood? And over 75% of the respondents continue to respond in that particular manner. With that, I know we can do better. And I recognize from all of the correspondence and the opportunity to hear the voices of Lincoln that there are ways that we can work to improve the services we provide with the community. In addition, another way, separate and distinct from the QSAs, is a City of Lincoln Taking Charge survey that was conducted last in 2017, where specific questions were posed by members of the University of Nebraska-Lincoln Public Policy Center. In this particular survey, amongst a whole host of other questions, respondents were asked about their trust and confidence in the Lincoln Police Department. I specifically asked for those questions to be posed back in 2017 as part of this survey. And when the results came back and we found that there was satisfaction with police services was as highly rated and second only to the overall quality of life in Lincoln, I knew we were doing some things right. In the same manner, the mindset, the mantra of continuous improvement, of working with the community, will be built on that foundation that we're seeing. Mayor?
Thank you, Chief. It is important that we measure our community's trust in our police force and that we use data as the backbone of our decision-making. And in our resident satisfaction surveys moving forward, in partnership with UNL's Public Policy Center, as the Chief mentioned, we will be asking residents to continue to help us gauge our community's trust and confidence in our police. Technology provides another tool for understanding the performance of our officers. My proposed budget to the City Council contains funding for the complete implementation of body-worn cameras for every officer. These devices are an additional tool to supplement other accountability and transparency measures by providing video footage of police interactions with our residents. LPD has policies in place today regarding the use of body-worn cameras, which they began to pilot several years ago. These policies, which can be found on LPD's website as General Order 2070, address the circumstances in which body-worn cameras must be used and how long the footage must be retained. The policies also require that supervisors proactively review the officer's body-worn camera footage as an opportunity for training and quality assurance. Technology also provides us with the opportunity to review policing data to identify and address racial disparities. LPD embraces a culture of transparency and currently publishes online disaggregated data broken down by race, ethnicity, and a host of other categories through our city's open data portal. They also share data on their own website and through the Nebraska Crime Commission. To make this information even more readily available to the public, we will work to provide and publish online more accessible visualizations of this disaggregated policing data on topics such as citations and arrests, traffic stops, missing person investigations, crime trends, and trends in mental health calls for service. Next, we turn to the vitally important topic of LPD's community partnerships. LPD stands firm in its commitment to a strong community policing model, both operationally and budgetarily. Among the many benefits of a strong community policing model are the relationships that our officers develop that allow them to identify opportunities to involve nonprofit social service providers in response to calls for service. LPD partners extensively with organizations throughout our community, recognizing that our officers are called upon to respond to residents with a wide variety of needs, and that the police have a significant role to play in keeping people out of the criminal justice system. These providers help residents with, for example, substance abuse and mental health issues, thereby reducing the need for more traditional involvement by our officers. The Chief will now discuss more on this topic, including recent and proposed stepped-up investments with our community partners.
When I came to the Lincoln Police Department in 2016 and I had an opportunity to start evaluating some of the fundamental strengths and the culture of this particular organization, I continue to be inspired by the partnerships that have been formulated for so many years that make our community safer. There is a firm cultural belief that arrest is the last resort and that our officers, our staff, work with individuals, with their families, with their service providers to find the most appropriate avenue to address underlying concerns. Some of those underlying concerns are mental health. Some surround substance abuse. alcoholism. And those are two that really come to mind is the data-driven, evidence-based approach that we've been using for approximately a decade with the Mental Health Association and the REAL program. And when we've studied this at 12 months and 24 months and 36 months after, we know that those that take advantage of the outstanding service from the MHA are less likely to have police calls for service, are less likely to be placed into emergency protective custody. That is impactful and improves the quality assurance of their life. In this year's budget, for the first time, 2020-2021, with the support of the mayor's office, we doubled the amount of money that we are placing towards the MHA. So it can have the continuity of services and continue to provide that critical need to the city of Lincoln. In addition, substance abuse. It surrounds much of what we do in policing. And I am proud of the outstanding partnership and services that we have with the Bridge. More than $400,000 of the Lincoln Police Department budget goes to continue to provide support to the Bridge, the Civil Protective Custody Program, and it isn't limited to that. While that is an alternative to jail and one that we seek out whenever we can, it is opening the door of opportunity for those that are struggling with an addiction to alcohol and drugs to be able to seek further treatment beyond those first few hours. It's going to improve their life, their family's life, and allow them to be more productive citizens within the city of Lincoln. Those are two examples. There are so many more that come to mind regarding our community engagement events, regarding partnering with nonprofits. And we continue to look for those particular solutions, recognizing that we are not the experts in all of these fields, but yet there is a demand for our services, and it continues to come in when somebody's loved one goes missing, when somebody is having suicidal ideations. They're calling us, and we're going. We're locating their missing person. We're looking for the root cause of why they left home and were out of care. And in the same manner, we're looking to see what are the underlying causes that have contributed to this despair that is presenting itself on any particular day. That is our commitment going forward, and again, it is a great opportunity that wouldn't be possible without so many of these partners that we have in Lincoln.
Thank you, Chief. The steps that we've shared so far today are specific to our police department, yet I want to be clear that we recognize disparities in policing are a symptom and not the root cause of racial injustice. The roots of racism in America run deep, and untangling them will require systematic response by every sector and every individual. For our part, the City of Lincoln is committed to doing the long-term necessary work to create a more just and equitable community. Doing this work in meaningful and sustained ways will require making investments and building partnerships like the Chief described. It means listening to and learning from leaders in the fields of equity, diversity, and inclusion who can lend their expertise to our efforts. We have begun this process by partnering with Inclusive Communities, a nonprofit organization based in Omaha that provides invaluable education and advocacy in the areas of diversity and inclusion to schools, businesses, and communities. Over the coming weeks and months, Inclusive Communities will provide training to our city department directors and a cross-section of our city team. They'll provide training designed to break down stereotypes, myths, and barriers among diverse identities. This training and our ongoing consultation with Inclusive Communities will help ensure that the City of Lincoln is an even more inclusive workplace, and that we are incorporating the values of equity and respect for every resident into the work that we do each day. We also want to extend this equity building effort and investment into our broader community. The City of Lincoln, in partnership with the Malone Center, the Bonsall Charitable Fund, the Lincoln Community Foundation, the Community Health Endowment, Lincoln Public Schools, and the Lincoln Chamber of Commerce, is pleased to announce that we will co-sponsor a virtual keynote address for the Lincoln community by longtime advocate for justice and peace, Pastor Ben Mcbride. Pastor Ben is a nationally recognized leader in community building, advancing cultures of equity and belonging, and police and gun violence prevention. His experience includes training over 100 law enforcement departments and executives and working with school districts and private companies on promoting equity and inclusion. In his keynote, Pastor Ben will address how to create cultures of belonging and how Lincoln can become a national model for community-wide change. This keynote is anticipated to take place in late July to early August, and it will include opportunities for people to come together and draw upon his guidance to create tangible actions relevant to their situations. More details will be announced by the end of July. In addition to investing in partnerships with local and national experts in creating a more inclusive community, we must deliberately apply a lens of equity to the work that we do as a city. And this means continually asking ourselves, who will a proposed policy benefit or potentially harm? Whose input have we received and who is not at the table? And in what ways might a proposed policy address or reinforce racial inequities? For years, our Lincoln and Lancaster County Health Department has used data to map health inequities in our community, including disparities in life expectancy and gaps in access to health insurance. The Health Department will further this work in the coming weeks by convening a group of community stakeholders to identify targeted solutions to address these and other health disparities that deeply impact the lives of our residents. We would be remiss if we did not also acknowledge the intersection between racial and economic inequity, as exemplified by disparities in access to capital, disparities in opportunities for upward mobility, and disparities in income and quality of employment across race and ethnicity. A core component of the mission of the Mayor's Economic Recovery Task Force, which was convened to develop strategies to help our local economy recover from the pandemic, is to foster inclusion. Inclusive growth and inclusive recovery must be our guiding principles. Equitable development is not an afterthought, but rather a social and economic imperative. In addition, we know that criminal and civil justice systems impact Black residents and residents of color in profound and disparate ways that go beyond just policing. Prosecution is one of the most important, yet least visible, ways in which racial disparities can be addressed. Johansi Christie, our new city attorney, subject to approval by the City Council, has pledged to make prosecutorial reform a key component of his work. And finally, we remain committed at the City of Lincoln to addressing specific instances of discrimination in our community through the Lincoln Commission on Human Rights. Any resident who believes they have experienced discrimination in employment, housing, or public accommodation may contact the Lincoln Commission on Human Rights by calling 402-441-7264, by sending an email to lchr@lincoln.ne.gov, or by completing an online incident report available at humanrights.lincoln.ne.gov. In conclusion, the policies, practices, and programs that we have outlined today are designed to foster trust and community and are designed to lead to more equitable outcomes for every resident in policing and beyond. We are fortunate to live in a city where so many are reaching across divides to realize the vision of a community where people of every race feel a true sense of belonging. As I stated last week, everyone has a part to play in this work. We create transformed, inclusive new realities by becoming transformed, inclusive people. This is about the resident as well as the public servant, the private as well as the public sector. It means me, it means the government and our police department, and it means you. Together, we will create a better future here in Lincoln. And with that, we'll open it up for questions.
Riley Johnson with the Journal-Star with the first.
Riley.
Hi, a question for either you, Mayor, or Chief Blymeister. With the policies directed towards changing some of the tactics or sort of outlawing or banning some of the tactics. To what extent do LPD's upper management know that how frequently they're used, particularly the chokehold? Is that something that there have been documented cases in LPD of using that?
I'll let the chief come up and address data questions like this, Riley.
Good afternoon, Riley. I'll attempt to address the question to the best of my ability. So chokeholds and strangleholds, by their definition, have been banned and are not an instructed topic of the Lincoln Police Department and haven't been. What this policy is doing is explicitly banning that within our policies and procedures. And so the number of uses of that particular is 0. Now, I'll expand upon this. We are also including in this particular draft that is being presented to the CPAB and to the public for their input, removing 2 different types of neck restraints. One is something that has not been taught by the Lincoln Police Department in more than a decade. That is called the lateral vascular neck restraint. The second would be a unilateral, it's called a shoulder pin technique. And if you research online, you can find both of these available. So have those been used? Yes. 14 times in the last 5 years is what they have been utilized. And part of the discussion that I brought to the CPAB in the public forum is that it is removing a tool, a less than lethal tool, that can now only be used in a lethal force situation. And, okay, I'll stay up here until there's a question for the mayor.
Chief Andrew Ozaki from Channel 7 News. I guess when you talk about these neck restraints, can you talk about whether or not you might increase the chances of people being killed now because you're reducing these less than lethal methods?
I certainly hope that increasing the chances of individuals being killed, that Andrew, as you're well aware, and many of the citizens are, that these are very uncontrolled, very infrequent circumstances. And there is the potential when we remove a less than lethal tool that we'll have to resort back to lethal force options. I don't believe that's going to happen, but it is certainly a potential that I certainly cannot say never. And this particular discussion, the very question that you have posed, was put directly to the CPAB for their consideration, and one that I know that they'll take very seriously.
Riley with the Journal Star with the question for the mayor. With your decision to review pardon applications, how do you think allowing some pardons may affect the ability of future mayors or yourselves to use a curfew in similar circumstances in the future? Do you think that you may send the wrong message, or have you considered that message that's being sent?
I think that any future mayor will have an opportunity to learn from the lived experience of myself and from our law enforcement agencies, because until the nights of May 29th through June 1st, there had been no experience by us of those kinds of conditions. It was abstract. And in having gone through those experiences and learning and evolving through the process, we are making sure that we are codifying and memorializing what we have learned so that future city staff, future elected officials will have the benefit of our lived experience. The pardon is a rarely used tool. It does exist. And for those who are peacefully protesting who may have gotten caught in the melee, because of other bad actors who grafted on to these protests to cause chaos and calamity. If they were hurt in the shuffle during an act of civil disobedience and arrested, would not want their act of civil disobedience, if it was peaceful, to potentially create a mark on their record that would prevent them from the very opportunities that we want all of our citizens to be able to have for economic success. Again, I anticipate that there will be rare use of this tool, and certainly what transpires over the next 6 months to a year will be instructive for future mayors.
Mayor, why not just dismiss those charges like other cities have done?
Those kind of decisions are not up to a mayor. Those kinds of decisions to press or drop charges are historically reserved for a city attorney, and with good reason. It's important that prosecutorial decision-making is insulated to a certain extent from the executive or the political branches of government, and the city attorney has to be able to conduct independent investigations and prosecutions, and the pardon power, however, is really different because that is a mayoral prerogative.
But aren't you sending a message to the prosecutor that if they go ahead with these, that they're just going to be overturned anyway? So why don't, what's your opinion? Are you telling them to dismiss these charges?
No, I'm telling them to dismiss these charges. I'm saying that on a case-by-case basis, we will review anyone who decides to apply for a pardon, and we don't presume that everyone will.
Mayor Riley at the Journal Star. Has your desire to hire officers with the COPS grant the city applied for to perhaps investigate gun-related violence or gun crimes in the city, has that changed? Do you still feel there's a need for those officers, or will the city be turning down the grant?
Let me be clear. The City of Lincoln Police Department is one of the leanest in the country. We have one of the lowest, officer to population ratios in the country, and we're proud of their ability to provide public safety given the limited resources that they have at their disposal. And they've made improvements in technology and their training and their best practices that have allowed them to offer excellence despite the lack of resources. When I first became mayor, I worked with the chief to identify ways to fund the addition of new officers, knowing that that was a policing priority. As we came into this budgeting cycle, we, of course, were presenting the budget just at the time that we'd gone through these experiences, these unprecedented and extraordinary experiences in our community of protest and riot. And in undertaking an authentic community conversation about priorities and how resources are allocated, we did put a pause on the grant that we found out that we had an informal approval of. And that pause is intended to allow us to have a conversation with the public about how best to utilize resources. It doesn't mean that we will ultimately turn down the grant, but it gives us an opportunity to examine how else that grant might be used, whether or not there are other priorities, and to acknowledge that one of the priorities of the Lincoln Police Department over many years that I heard, both as a council person and as a mayor, were body-worn cameras. And we heard that request coming from the community as well. So this seemed like an opportunity and the right moment to prioritize body-worn cameras as a budgetary item in the Lincoln Police Department budget. But we are, of course, committed to making sure that our public safety services, and that includes the number of officers, grow over time to support the growth of our community.
As a follow-up, do you have a time frame for when a decision is needed by the city on that policy question?
I didn't anticipate originally hearing back on the COPS grant until the fall, so I don't have a timeline for you right now, Riley.
Mayor, as you discussed the response to the demonstrations and mass gatherings between May 29th and June 1st, There's been calls on the city council to have the city pay for some of those injured by the less lethal response measures by police officers. Do you think that part of this equation and that redress for that period of time is that the city should fund some of the medical bills of people who are injured by rubber bullets or gas canisters?
You know, Riley, unlike other cities, the fine money in this instance goes to the court and the public school system, not the city. So we're not really in a position to reimburse fines from the city's coffers. That said, we do acknowledge and appreciate the disproportionate impact that fines and bonds have on communities of color. In fact, one of our police officers, Captain Morrow, spoke at a roundtable the other day about the role that fines and bonds play in magnifying racial disparities. And part of the reason that we are nominating Johansi Christie to serve as city attorney is because he has a keen insight and understanding into these disparities coming from his work as a public defender, and of course he is committed to addressing them.
Just a follow-up, sorry, and I don't mean to monopolize the time, but I think I might have, I don't know if I was, if I got through, but were you talking about sort of court fines? My question was more about whether the medical bills that some are seeking a payment for reimbursement as a tort claim more, what your position on the city there is.
My apologies, I can address that too, Riley. You know, that the injuries to our officers and to protesters were awful and absolutely heartbreaking. It's not what any of us wanted to have happen here in Lincoln. And I am certainly sorry for the harm that occurred during those tumultuous nights. When it comes to using taxpayer dollars to pay for medical bills, there is a process that we have to adhere to, and that allows people to make claims against the city for payment where they believe the city is responsible for damages. When evaluating those claims, it's our obligation to take into account a number of considerations, including the city's potential liability for damages, and the city's responsibility to adhere to that process in no way, of course, diminishes the harm that occurred during those nights to protesters and officers alike.
And Mayor Andrew from Channel 7 again. How much of a part of the budget that you guys are trying to redirect to some of those intervention programs and mental health programs as opposed to the total budget? Is it enough, when you look at the grand scheme of things and how much you're putting towards your police budget?
Andrew, is it enough? I just went through an exercise in cutting $12 million from our budget. We disaggregated a biennial budget because things are so tight. No, there's not enough. Absolutely, there's not enough to meet the needs. But we are committed to doing the best we can with the amount of resources we have. And we hope that our community, as they call for changes, will also back up those calls with willingness to invest, because it will take that from our citizens and our residents in order to affect and expand the existing programs.
Riley with the Journal Star, a question about the CPAB related changes. What's the intended goal of some of those changes? Is there a conflict in the complaint process that the CPAB members investigate and the existing internal affairs processes that the police department has?
There was no conflict, no evidence of anything that was not functioning. We just took a look at the ordinance out of a proactive interest in trying to strengthen and make our processes more robust. And when you look and see that people can only file a complaint by coming down to an office in person and filing it in a written paper-based form, and given the pandemic and all the changes that we've made to try to make things more accessible in online formats, we knew that this was an important thing to evaluate. So really it was trying to make, kind of in the spirit of continuous improvement and modernization and accessibility, to make a few changes that will help the Citizens Police Advisory Board both be more accessible and be in a position to do its job, achieving quorum and having the materials it needs well before it meets. Any other questions? All right, well, thank you so much for tuning into this briefing. We appreciate it, and we'll be back later this week.